Hey folks, Nathan here. Welcome to Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games, and this time we continue our look at Ascension with another brand new release here in July of 2018, which is Ascension Delirium. Okay, so this is basically the 13th of the large sets that we've gotten here, right? We had War of Shadows, which was sort of 10. It was marked with that X, and since then we've had Gift of the Elements, Valley of the Ancients, and now Delirium. And Delirium, as a concept, sort of bridges back to what happened back in Realms Unraveled, which is the first of those big sets after they stopped doing those alternating big and small sets for blocks for the first 3 years of the game. But in using that as sort of part of its story basis, it weaves it into the Dreamscape concept from that large set and brings back some of the mechanics from Dreamscape, but does it in a somewhat different way. So think of Delirium kind of as a spiritual successor to both Realms Unraveled and Dreamscape, but from a gameplay perspective, essentially a sequel of sorts to Dreamscape. We're bringing back Insight, we're bringing back the Dreamborn, just not the Dream Deck and such. So, this is what our box is going to look like. We, of course, will have our rule book to go with it. We have our honor tokens, 25 large red ones for 5, 25 small white ones for 1. And because we are using Insight, just like Dreamscape, we have our Insight tokens as well. 10 large and 20 small this time. Not as many as honor, but we won't need as many as for honor. We also have another weird item in the box that I'm going to keep sort of hidden for now. Let's take a look here at the board. Another nice board. I love the look of the newer boards where they have a lot of art on them. They're not as plain looking as many of the early ones were. As for our cards, as expected, we have our Cultist, our always available card here. Same old Cultist pretty much. Silver outline there. We have our cards that we're going to need for our starting decks. So we have 32 Apprentices and 8 Militia, because of course we want enough to have 4 players worth of starting decks. We then have our Mystic, in this case 20, and we have our Heavy Infantry, also 20. As for our center deck, also known as the Portal deck, we have 99 new cards here, some of which are designed in such a way like Cetra Void Mother, to take characters we've seen before as cards in other sets and sort of give them a twist, usually throwing them to a different faction than they would have been with before. Okay, so there's our Portal deck. We got our Void there. We've got our 6 spaces for our center role, and we've got our honor pool spot over there off to the side. Now, as I said, this does bring back Insight from Dreamscape. Let's first, though, look at a couple of things that are brought back from Valley of the Ancients. Okay? Valley of the Ancients is the most recent set prior to this one, and it had the new Echo keyword, which does return here. Gain this effect if there is a card of that type in your discard pile, in this case, a Void card. We also had the Serenity keyword from back in Valley of the Ancients. It's back. That's where you gain an effect if there are no cards in your discard pile. So those two concepts have returned from the previous set, but it's sort of a very light continuation from the previous set. It's not really a true sequel per se to Valley of the Ancients. It's much more tied back to Dreamscape. Now, as with Dreamscape, you're going to have those cards that are called Dreamborn. And when a Dreamborn card comes out of the center deck, or the Portal deck, into the center row, as soon as it comes out, everybody gains 1 Insight. Again, Insight is a new currency available only in Dreamscape and here in Delirium. That's those little Insight tokens there. But we're not going to spend them the same way. So you get 1 when it comes out. Everybody gets 1 when it hits the center row. And then if you were to acquire one of these cards, it doesn't say it anywhere, but it is a Dreamborn card. If you acquire a Dreamborn card, you get 1 Insight just for you. So basically, every Dreamborn card that comes out provides at least 2 Insight to whoever gets it, and then 1 Insight to everyone else. And of course, it has its own, abilities whenever you bring it into your deck and you wind up playing it on subsequent turns. Now, back in Dreamscape, if we were going to use our insight, usually it was to purchase cards out of our Dream deck, which were cards only available to that particular player. There is no Dream deck here. It's not so much that you're gaining allies and such from the Dreamscape, as things from the Dreamscape have sort of made their way into New Vigil, the world of Ascension, and they're around you like other monsters and characters tend to be. So we have different ways to use our insight than we had before, even if we're gaining it essentially the same way. One new ability is called Recur. It's a new keyword, typically tied into insight, which is you may pay 1 insight, in this case, to recur. And it tells you in parentheses behind it what that means. Gain the effect listed above an additional time. You may only recur once. So if I play this card, Dimension Monk, I draw a card. Then if I want to pay 1 insight after all the effects of this card are done, I can then recur it, which is as if I played it a second time. I gain all these effects again. Okay? But it is just the effects there listed on the card itself. Nothing otherwise related to it. So it gives us the ability to sort of hammer away with powerful cards if they happen to have recur, sort of double the bang for the buck, almost as if you have an extra card sitting in your hand as a duplicate of one of the cards that you've already played. Kind of cool there. Again, usually tied in to insight. We have cards available like Dreamscape Diviner that just give us some insight as one of its effects. You'll see that here. You'll see that also in Dreamscape. Not really a new mechanic, but yes, that's another way to get them. Then we also have what's referred to as auction, or a fate auction. You may recall that way back in Return to the Fallen, we were introduced to fate cards. And a fate card, basically, when it flips out into the center row, whatever the fate thing says happens immediately. It's an immediate effect upon revelation, not upon acquisition. Well, in this case, our fate cards are fate auction, which is a little bit different. It says fate auction insight to gain the effect below. In this case, gain 4 honor. So when this flips out into the center row, that auction takes effect. And what the auction basically is that everybody is sort of competing, if they're interested, to have that effect happen immediately. It's not just it flips out and the effect happens, because we got to figure out who it's going to benefit. So you, as the active player, would then auction it off and make a bid and say, okay, well, I bid 3 insight. And then it goes clockwise around the table. Well, I bid 4 insight or 5 insight. I pass, whatever. And by the time it goes around the table, whoever has bid the most insight can then pay that insight to get that effect while it's sitting there in the center row, just like a regular fate ability. Then once you acquire the card, of course, if you then play it, you get that effect when you play it. But you have the ability to get it even if you don't actually acquire the card while it is sitting there in the center row as soon as it flips out, if you got the insight to be able to win that auction. So that's another of the new ways that insight is used. But the weirdest comes down to a new physical item that is in the box included, which is really, aside from tokens and cards, the only physical thing we've really been dealing with since Hedron's Dreidel, which was a weird promo item we looked at a while back. That item is a die. The so-called Delirium Die. And the idea is that on your turn, you can spend 5 insight to roll this bad boy. And it has varying effects. Gain 5 honor. Gain 3 runes. Draw 2 cards. This one, you may banish a card in your hand or in your discard pile. Gain 4 attack. Gain 6 insight. Right? So, beneficial effects, but random beneficial effects. But you get to roll this at any point where on your turn you decide to spend 5 of your insight. So you can spend it for the auction, you can spend it to recur. There are other odd instances where you might wind up using it, but primarily it's going to come down to trying to use the chaos of the situation to get yourself some benefit as you play. But again, no dream deck this time around, so there aren't any special cards that are only available to you as you play. That is a significant difference from Dreamscape. In essence, what they've done is they've given us the same currency, insight, which is gained in a similar fashion, but that is used basically in a completely different way. It'd be like if they brought back energy from Rise of Vigil, but then turned around and used it for something completely different than regular Energize abilities. It's cool, and it gives us a new way to use something that is familiar if you've been playing for a while, but it is kind of an odd way to approach it. So if you're into Ascension and you like a game that has another currency, gets a little more complex, and gives you some different abilities with a little bit of randomness thrown in, then Delirium is probably the big set for you. With that, we will wrap up this episode, but we'll continue with our coverage of Ascension as more products are released.